And so from a strategy perspective, I think, just about in every business, you have your competitors and what they're doing and what you're doing. And I do think from a strategy perspective, some of it is, you got to show up with, your services, your products, and what you do best, bringing that. But it also has to be responsive to what's happening in the market, what other businesses are doing, as well as what the consumer needs are as well. And so I do see a lot of overlap, especially in, competitive sports, and then into business from a strategy standpoint of, you do have to make sure you're at your best, and then being able to adapt. And sometimes that means that, you may not always only be working from your strengths, depending on what some of those areas are. It may be needing to reinforce some of the other areas, in business as well to strengthen those.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today our guest is Jeremy Zoch. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. Now, Jeremy, tell me something unexpected.
It's a beautiful day. I'm enjoying Southern California. And, I grew up in a small town in Minnesota and I love water skiing. And I had a chance to go water skiing yesterday. And after being out with my teenage kids and some of their friends, had a chance to play tennis last night in an official match after water skiing all day. So unexpectedly, my legs and my whole body is sore today.
I can imagine. I can definitely imagine. Tell me a bit more about what you do, Jeremy.
I'm a passionate healthcare executive. I've been working as a CEO and a chief operating officer for many, many years, and had a chance when I was 18, 19 years old to start caring for people. First as a certified nursing assistant and later providing care to children and adults with developmental disabilities, and continued on that path into leadership and administration. And so for me, as a healthcare executive, and as somebody that really tries to take the best care of myself and for my faith, family, and friends, to continue doing our best.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, Jeremy, we're going to talk about today the sort of traits that athletes have and organisational leadership uses in terms of strategy, prep, and success, and how they overlap. So I'm kind of curious, what made you want to talk about that in the first place?
Well, I have been talking about it for years. And I think, to be around our executive team at the hospital that I'm at, to hear us talk about it, you would often hear us describing it as part of the training, as part of the intentional setup, kind of that grounding, that foundation, and that leadership, like athletic events, it is that journey. It's a marathon, and it's the preparation, but also the flexibility that when you're in those events to be able to make the adjustments and changes. And I do find a lot of correlation between that preparation and game day, and the same in business and leadership, being able to evolve and adapt when necessary to continue to be successful and to be relevant.
Okay. So what are those traits then?
I think at the beginning there is you have to have a goal. And for me, my a passion of mine has been marathon running. And my brother and I together ran a few marathons in a few states, and we have a vision of running a marathon or more in each state. So I think one of those traits is setting that goal of what you're trying to do, either from a company perspective or from an athletic pursuit. If it's learning how to play pickleball, which is incredibly popular right now, setting that goal, I think, is a trait. And then starting to look at what are those steps that it's going to take to be able to do that. And frankly, several of the races that I've signed up for, my brother and I, we did a 100-mile road race. And when both of us signed up, we knew that we had no idea how we were going to run 100 miles. and And, it took us 2 years of training and preparation for it. And we spent a lot of times talking about strategies. But I think often you think about from a business perspective of whether it's a new product, a new service, moving into a new market, there's that goal of what the desired achievement is. But then it's starting to really kind of break that down. How do you expect to feel 25 miles into that race? What about at the 50-mile mark? How do you plan for a distance that you've never run, 75 miles? And then, being able to really visualize what that finish line was going to feel like. And knowing that as much as it was my brother and I running, that we were going to need a team. It was going to have to be others helping support us throughout that race and making sure that we stayed hydrated, our nutrition was good, and frankly, that we kept energized through a race like that. So I think that planning and each of the steps is another key trait to it. And lastly, I would add just kind of for three traits to really look at is flexibility. And that's
Mm.
something that I think in business is incredibly important, as much as, to really have that firm foundation of who you are and what's important to you. And that framework is important. But I think especially as we go through our lives and especially in business today, being flexible. And a chief nursing officer that I respected so much, one of the things that she said was, some of the hardest leader decisions are knowing what to change and what to keep the same. And I thought of that often of, really, is this something we should be fighting to keep the same? Or is this something we should be embracing that change? And I think having that as part of that, really firm foundation of we got to be flexible, we got to be grounded, bringing that balance and awareness into the process as an athlete and also as a leader can really help.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, then. So do you think that there's something there about similar mindsets? Or is it just on the execution of that preparation?
I think there's a mindset. For me, one of my words that resonates with me is perseverance.
Hmm.
And I think the same in business, if anybody's, found the easy business where they just set it up and it just runs for 10 years, great. But when I talk to small business owners, when I talk to leaders, it seems like every year when you're doing your budget, it's always the hardest year. And it's, that continual pressure with competitors and to be able to continue to have your services evolve. And so to me, that perseverance, the same in training for athletic events, is that pushing for excellence. And I think that's something that, I've kind of seen as, I've went through my life that, it doesn't always mean, winning or, finishing first. But I think it does mean that as an individual and with your team, that the work you're doing is the very best that you can do. And I
Mm.
think there's a lot of that feeling when you know that it's your very best, that it fills you with a lot of pride. And I think your customers, and I think, as you're celebrating in those events, that comes across to people when it's your best. I know from hotels that I've been at, you feel that feeling of really that service of being at the highest level and the best. And that's something that I think from a leadership and from your own personal journey of showing up on game day, on race day, and being able to be feeling like you've given your very best based on your training and your mindset.
Okay. I like that. So what else can we learn from athletes then?
Well, I learned that I have a psoas muscle. Who knew?
I'm like, and what is that?
I had no idea what a psoas muscle was, but this winter I was playing tennis and the court was a little slippery and I had a fall and, I was pretty sure it was my hamstring or something. But as I learned, and through a very difficult, probably 3-month injury, a psoas muscle kind of connects from kind of your mid leg all the way up to kind of the bottom of your ribs. So it's a very long muscle. And it was, incredibly painful that if I was laying on my back and would try to raise my left leg, it wouldn't go. because my whole stomach said, do not move. And that was a time, for me, and, I've been healthy and been able to do a lot of things, but it was a time when I could no longer do the things that I really enjoyed. I could not run. Playing tennis was incredibly difficult. And so I think it got to a point where it was like, well, what can I do then?
Mm.
And what I found I could do really well was walk our golden doodle, Coco. And it was different because I usually find, a lot of kind of renewal and energy when I have a chance to go on a, trail run and be able to really work at a high intensity level. But what I found was through those months of really only being able to walk, it was still a way to find that sense of renewal. And it really was that mindset of, but what can you do today? And so rather than spend, months being frustrated about what I couldn't do, I think that mental mindset of what could you do and to still enjoy it. And I frankly found beaches I had been to. We happened to be on a trip to Texas during that time, and I had a chance to experience the neighborhoods and the cities and beaches in a way that usually I'm running through them and I'm not stopping for anything.
Yeah.
And so to be able to appreciate it at a different pace was something very helpful. And now for me today, being healthy, today when I was up early and saying my prayers and kind of setting my daily intentions to just have gratitude for my health after it was lost is something to really appreciate what I did have the opportunity to do today, even though I'm a little sore. So I would say that, and then, translating that to business
Yeah.
is, whether it means maybe going through a transition in a position or, as either your role or as businesses change for something that can feel so right for so long in a place where you may be working, at some point things change. And that right opportunity may be to make a move or to make that next step to somewhere else. And I think kind of having that openness that, as we go through this life, as much as, we fight hard to kind of keep things the same, things keep evolving and changing. And I think having that perspective of we get to instead of we have to can really help as far as how we approach our work as well.
Yeah, I've started to learn that from watching American movies actually, when a lot of people, when you see people go, what you mean is you can get to, and I was like, that does actually do change your view, doesn't it? Because it's like it becomes a privilege, right?
I think it really does. And, frankly, I've been in between. I finished my last position about 10, 11 months ago, and, I'm actively interviewing, and I'll be, going back to full-time work very soon. But in that time, it was for me a chance to really appreciate that for the first time in my life, I wasn't, working all the time and, at work, and I had that space. And I have to tell you, I miss the work. I miss going in and being with the team of people, getting a chance to be, in the hospital and really a chance to connect. And so for me, now going back into that environment, so energized and looking forward to it, to be able to bring that to the team and be able to work together is something that, I think it's just that perspective of it's not how many days till retirement, but that, this is a day where we get to work. And I think it's, kind of part of our design that, that ability to help others and serve, that we do find, strengthen that ourselves as we're doing that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, do you see any kind of overlap when it comes to strategy?
I think, strategy, I will share with you, I am currently addicted to tennis. So it was something that I enjoyed playing in high school. And the reason I got back into tennis was actually when I read Rafael Nadal's memoir. And in the memoir, he spoke about how much time he spent preparing for the opponents that he would play.
Right.
And it was actually what kind of spurred me to go from more doing triathlons and marathon running into getting back and playing more tennis, because I miss that part of it, that responding to what your competitor is doing and how that changes the game. And so from a strategy perspective, I think, just about in every business, you have your competitors and what they're doing and what you're doing. And I do think from a strategy perspective, some of it is, you got to show up with, your services, your products, and what you do best, bringing that. But it also has to be responsive to what's happening in the market, what other businesses are doing, as well as what the consumer needs are as well. And so I do see a lot of overlap, especially in, competitive sports, and then into business from a strategy standpoint of, you do have to make sure you're at your best, and then being able to adapt. And sometimes that means that, you may not always only be working from your strengths. Depending on what some of those areas are, it may be needing to reinforce some of the other areas in business as well to strengthen those.
Yeah, I like what you said there about you're not always going to be working from your strength, and that is definitely a good lesson to have in business, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and being a hospital executive through the pandemic, we had all these plans, for future growth and expansion, and we love expanding our services and getting a chance to start new things. And all of a sudden, it was, how do we safely care for our community? How do we keep our nurses and our caregivers safe? And it changed the focus. And I'll admit, there were some times probably early on in it where it was like, when does this end? When do we get back to the business development, the strategy, and the things we really, were so passionate about and feeling like we had to be really moving forward on, to really kind of coming to a new perspective of, what's needed now is for our leadership team to really be out right next, side by side with our caregivers, with the patients as they're going through their treatment. And it really turned for almost those 2 years during the pandemic from a role that was really kind of further looking ahead,
Hmm.
to much more of a role that was really working with.
Okay.
And I think that was the right adjustment to make during that time, as it was, what was needed based on, where we were at.
Okay, that's a good example. So would you say that leaders should be thinking about their employees as high performing athletes and maybe treating them as such?
I do. It's, yeah. And I think not only as athletes, but really as a whole,
Mm.
I mean, you think about high performing athletes and, take any example from any sport, but if you show up and, I can think of it from some professional athletes, if things are going on in their personal life, if the inspiration isn't necessarily there, you're not going to get the same results. And
Mm.
so I think thinking about the teams that you work with, it has to be more than here's the food you eat, here's the training schedule, and showing up for race day. I think especially as people, those little factors make a difference. And I think as we work together with people, when you say, how are you today? And, really listening and being able to understand that, not every day for, for every person is the greatest day of work ever. Right. Sometimes people can have a lot going on, and things can be happening. And so I think to kind of meet people where they're at and understand what you can do to help motivate, and also, kind of where they're coming from, can help make a difference as well. And then you add in the great training plans and the great structure and that coaching and the reinforcement and tracking and database to really see the progress that you're making. And I think that data and the performance go hand in hand, and you start to see your progression.
That makes a lot of sense. And I suppose with athletes, we accept that they can't win the race each time, but maybe in organizations as leaders, we don't accept that people can always hit their deadlines on time or do the thing right on time. It's almost like a higher standard.
Yeah. And, sometimes, maybe the structure,
Mm.
for some athletes, I think about whether it's a baseball team, and all the different positions and how, based on a person's skill set and, other factors, can really help them know where they'll be playing best. And I love it, from a coaching perspective, whether it's, soccer, football coaches, you see the adjustments that they make and the differences that they get from the same group of individuals. And I think that again is, kind of understanding who you're playing against, but also really knowing your team. And so I do think, a lot of that overlap too of, really working with people's strengths. If you got somebody that's struggling, I'm laughing out loud because I'm remembering my last softball game that I was in. There was lights and I could not see the ball coming at me very well. And the other team figured it out and they just kept hitting it to me because they knew if they hit it to right field, I wasn't going to catch it. And so, I went through about an inning or two of that. And then I just, I let the coach know, like, I can't see in the glare. And so they moved people around and I thankfully got a chance to work somewhere else. But, I think about that where, to just keep doing what you're doing when it's not working really isn't, benefiting, anybody or the team. Whereas, working to put somebody in that had that skill set and then working to find a better place for me to be on the field where I could add value. I think a lot of times in business, that can happen. And you see people transitioning often within the same company into a space where they're able to be more productive. It works with their strengths. And, sometimes it is, with another company as well.
Mm. It also makes you think about it's not just what you're doing, it's also work in the environment. Like you were saying with those, sometimes you have to put in a different fielder because that environment suits them better. Jeremy, it's been really good to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think it's a great topic. I do think there's a lot of overlap and, I know it's been top of mind for me as well. Just when I am out doing something athletically, it's funny how many times when you're running, you end up thinking about things that are going on in business, or vice versa. And, I think just overall, as we go through the journey, the more we can, be at our best each day and really get a chance from a gratitude perspective of, we get this day. To make the very most of it, whether it's at work or the beach or wherever it may be. So thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I am Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.